Welcome to TableGoth. My name is Bully. I am the storyteller here at TableGoth. Today we're going to be covering the basic overview of what you'll need to know before you start a game of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. So, before someone starts a game of Vampire, they usually want to know what they need to do first, what they have to figure out, what sort of lore they need to understand, and my first steps before I jump into this game of Vampire. So there are two basic ways a chronicle is going to happen. One is that you have an idea already. You get your group together and you're like, hey, I have this idea. You pitch it to your group and you're like, hey, does this sound fun? Do you want to play this? And they say, yes, that's awesome, let's do it. Or maybe they're not super into it, and in that case you get new friends, I guess, or just the chronicle to fit what they want better, and then get new friends later. The other way a game starts is you and your gaming group are like, hey, we really want to try out Vampire, we really want to play Vampire, and no one knows who wants to run it. And then if you're watching this, that person's probably you, so congratulations, you're probably like the smartest, most creative, the best looking out of your friend group, a real leader, so they've turned to you to run this game for them. So if you're familiar with tabletop games in general, but not so much Vampire, a big difference is going to be you're going to be doing a lot more role-playing, storytelling, sort of setting building, rather than figuring out encounters and stuff like that. What's nice, though, is that material-wise, all you need is a book. Hang on, I got one. The core book will do you just fine. There's ones for the Camarilla and the Anarchs, and feel free to grab them. Got a lot of cool stuff in them, but you don't have to have those to run the game. And then you need dice. These are fancy dice because they say Vampire on them. Any D10s will work. And honestly, if you want to pull from a lot of other lore stuff, a lot of that info is online anyway, so you can just look it up as you need it. Another good thing, if you're running it for the first time, the game's pretty rules light compared to a lot of other systems. It encourages a lot of just going with the flow and making judgment calls. You're not going to have to memorize a complicated like combat system or a bunch of nuanced rules or anything like that. Really, you're just playing a ton of NPCs, and you're going to be deciding when people need to roll, when it's appropriate to roll, what attribute and skill or discipline they need to roll, and decide the number of successes they need. Boom. Before you think about it too much, to just save yourself a ton of time and energy and sanity, do a session 0. Sit down with the group you're going to be playing with, talk about what sort of game you want to play. Session 0 is super important. So if you do that, that'll answer most questions of like, oh, what things do I need to look up, or what do I need to be familiar with before jumping in? Believe me, there is way too much lore for you to just read everything and then ask what sort of game they want to play, because likely like 90% of that won't come into play anyway. Anyway, back to session 0. Not just Vampire, any game you play, you should do a session 0. Unless it's like a one-shot, then don't worry about it. 1, you don't need a 0. Everything else, 0. This is going to help manage expectations, get everyone on the same page, and like build excitement for the game you're about to run. More importantly, it helps avoid a lot of like pitfalls. It helps avoid a lot of like pitfalls and confusion that you might run into if one player wants to play something that isn't working with the rest, or one person has an idea for the game, the other person has an entirely different idea, and the campaign you run might not really fit either one. It's best just to, again, manage everyone's expectations so you don't run into those growing pains starting off. And what's cool about 5th edition, it has a built-in session 0. Like, they have rules for how to run session 0, step by step of what to do, so you can follow along if you've never done a session 0 before. And also, session 0 doesn't mean everyone has to tell each other everything. They should probably tell you if you're running this thing. But like, if they want character secrets and stuff, that's fine. You can still have a session 0, get all the stuff out that people need, and still have some secrets. Because this is it's a game for schemers. People like being scheming and sneaky and whatever, and that's fine. You can keep your secrets for session 0, just not from the storyteller. So yeah, I highly encourage going through the pre-chronicle rules they have written in the book. They cover everything. They probably cover too much. You could skip some things probably, but it's not going to hurt if you do everything. And another thing that's good to do, which they also cover, is figure out like the theme and sort of level of maturity you're going for. The setting is called the World of Darkness. It could be very emotionally draining. You could deal with a lot of stuff just by nature. Being a vampire or playing a vampire could be uncomfortable or kind of messed up. And exploring that stuff could be very rewarding, but just make sure everyone's cool with what you'll be getting into and how you will be handling some more sensitive issues. Also, be picky about who you play this with. Like, everyone can have fun with this. I think it's a great thing for new people, but it's definitely for like role players. If people want to come in and have fights and roll dice, that can happen. You can run a game like that, but that's not really what I think 5th edition is designed to be the most fulfilling. Also, going with like the mature stuff, this game attracts a lot of edgelords. If you're being edgy just for the sake of being edgy and that's why you want to play, either find a group that supports that or just leave the rest of us alone. It's embarrassing. For you, not for me. For you. Okay, so the first thing I want to figure out is just the basic premise of the game you're going to run. Not only should this be something all of your players are interested in, but something that you as a storyteller are going to enjoy and have fun running. So in my opinion, what this system sort of does best is like political intrigue, personal horror, and deep like character exploration in a dark setting. So figure out your tone, figure out the basic premise for your game, and then start building it from there. And also, don't get tripped up on the lore. If you want to tell a certain story, all this cool premise, and it doesn't really work with like canon vampire lore, that's fine. No one's going to stop you from playing that. Just do your thing. Anything that doesn't work for you, throw it out. Anything you need to be in the lore, put it in. Go wild. Go crazy. And if you need help just figuring out, like, okay, what do I do with the game of Vampire? What direction I go? They have a section called Chronicles towards the end of the book that gives you actually really pretty solid examples that you could use as a jumping off point. They have things like, what are some of the examples? They have Judgment Night. They have Fang Gang, Champions. Just different ideals to use. Something called the Default Chronicle if you're feeling crazy. As a default chronicle, now that I'm reading it, that's sort of what I'm doing. I might be basic. It's a lot of fun. Who cares? Go default. Go wild. If this is your first time to default chronicle, starting small and getting the feel for the characters is a very good idea. Read that. Also, when figuring out the premise of your game and what sort of game you want to run, play to your character's strengths. If you have a bunch of like super dramatic theater nerds who have just these crazy backstories, do that. Just keep things. You don't have to do the whole big political Gehenna jihad thing. You could just like explore your character's personal stories and weave those narratives and really dig into them. And if you have some people who are familiar with the lore, are willing to just play super powerful vampires and be like scheming for power over vast domains and whatnot, do that if your people are clever and think that's fun. If your players are all dumb, maybe don't do a scheming thing. So if you have a more casual group, they're new, you could take it easy on them a little bit. Just fill their setting with these really fun, not necessarily fun, but just very memorable, interesting NPCs to interact with. Have them play in a more forgiving environment, not like a tight Camarilla-controlled city where any mistakes your players make is going to have huge consequences. And allow big events to sort of propel the story forward and allow them to participate in it. Or just focus on them as characters and explore their personal stuff, like I said. Or if you have a bunch of people who are really good at role-playing but not super interested in combat, don't just throw Sabbat and Inquisition and goons at them constantly and have them just rolling unavoidable fights all the time. Like, reward the role-playing, explore that, go with the flow. Or if they do want to be badass vampires fighting stuff, I mean, go for it. It can work. The point is, do it, is fun for all of you guys and what you're going to be good at. Especially because this is a modern setting. Vampire is very much a game of consequences. So if your players are making mistakes, the results can be extremely punishing. So keep that in mind. Something helpful you could do is introduce a mala, which is like a vampire mom, that someone who knows the ropes and is showing your coterie, your party, sort of what to do and introducing them to the world of vampire. But if you're playing a mala who knows everything, that means you need to know everything, so... I mean, you're screwed either way, I guess. This is actually a game that, at least from a player's standpoint, can be really fun going in not knowing anything. Like, if they're playing a new vampire, getting thrown into this world of darkness, that's a really cool experience for them to have alongside their character. I actually discourage new players from just reading up and knowing on the lore, because it sort of takes away some of the magic and sort of peeks underneath the rocks, and they see some of the creepy things hiding under there before you can release them on them. And because, well, I mean, it doesn't have to be in a modern world. You could do it in any time setting, but if you're doing a modern campaign, everyone's coming in with a base knowledge of like how the world works. So a lot of that's done for them. You don't have to do a ton of world building. They understand how the world is built. You just get to reveal some of the secrets, things they thought they understood, they thought they knew what was going on. You get to sort of show them it's not what it seems. Okay, so you have your premise. Now you're going to figure out your setting. Typically, Vampire isn't like a globe-trotting game. It's designed to take place in one city, an urban setting. And it sounds like that could be stale, but it's not. If you have one city, you really build it up and evolve it, make it very complex. It won't really feel stagnant if you do it right. I mean, I guess they could be in the country, but like country vampires, that could be fun. Really, the idea is to make things engaging and interesting. So whatever's going on in your setting, in your city, there should be some sort of force of change, whether that's your players being the force of change or your players are trying to keep the status quo and these outside forces are trying to change things. So flesh out your city a little bit, have an idea of what it is now and where people are trying to take it. At the end of your chronicle, things should be much different, for better or worse, in the city. The book suggests using a city that everyone's familiar with, and that makes a lot of sense, so just do that. Or don't, but do. If you happen to live in or near a city and everyone sort of understands some of the landmarks and the general vibe of the place, it's really cool to sort of create a vampire lore around a place you're familiar with. If you all live in the middle of nowhere, just take a city everyone's familiar with from like media, like New York, LA, Chicago, London, just anything that everyone has a basic understanding of through books, movies, television, whatever, that they think would be a cool setting. This makes it easier for you as a storyteller too, because you don't have to provide every single detail of the city, because they should just have sort of a basic understanding of what things are like. And don't be afraid to add like new things to the city, or just make it up. I mean, you're pretending vampires exist, so you can pretend there's other things going on in the city that aren't true. If you need to add buildings or museums or whatever, or some problem that happens, some natural disaster, I mean, go for it. It's also nice because everyone can sort of visualize it without you having to take a bunch of details describing every little nook and cranny. You just describe the interesting parts or the parts that they should be paying attention to. Like, I'm running a game that takes place in St. Louis. We live here. There's an arch. So if stuff's going down at the arch, I don't have to be like, you see this big silver curved structure, like they know what the arch looks like. So boom, we are there. Well, I'm running a game for the internet, so maybe I should still be describing the things for other people. You don't have to do that though. I suggest not doing it. It's a pain. This game is fun. It's a pain. And then once you have your city, figure out who runs the city. Vampires are territorial. They have teams, sects, S-E-C-T-S. Teams. I mean, vampires have sex too. Anyway, figure out who's in charge. I mean, you got your Camarilla. They're in charge of most things. The Anarchs could be in charge. That could be interesting. Or it could be in a state of fluctuation between the two groups. Or throw Sabat in there. It's not really accurate with the current lore, but again, do what you want to do. I don't care. It's also fun, this, like, as a group. I mean, even your players can have input on that. Of like, man, that'd be cool if there were like gangrels who ran Forest Park. And that's something you can figure out session 0. You don't have to figure out like everything. Talk to your players. If they're like, oh, let's play in our city, and it would be really interesting if the Camarilla had control of it. And they were really strict about it, and we want to play Anarchs taking it over. And then, oh man, I bet Adventure like owns this huge company that's in our city, or the Toreador would definitely like hang out at our art museum. And it's fun pretending vampires are in charge of things and figuring it out. Or if you are someone who likes to have someone else figure stuff out for you, you just want to read about it and get a good base, there's a lot of books dealing with some of the bigger cities. A lot of the cities I mentioned, there's like books that say who's in charge of it and some plots going on in that city that you could pick up. So once you know who's in charge, figuring out who's trying to shake things up, the disruptors. A lot of times this will ideally be your players playing some part of this. Or if they're not the disruptors, they should be trying to stop the disruptors. So while you have all these machinations going on, hopefully your players will be coming up with some of their own to help or interfere with them. Or again, if you're not playing a big political thing, it might not be super important who's in charge of what and who owns every block of whatever in the city and carving out all the domains. I did that because why not? Let's use all my energy. You can just figure out like a neighborhood, start there, play to the individual stories, and then only build out as you need to. Figure out the basics of who's in charge and whatnot, but then plug in the rest as you go along. And yeah, the lore is overwhelming. Don't worry about it. Figure out the lore based on what kind of game you want to play, and then just take baby steps from there. You don't have to have it all figured out from session 1. I recommend creating characters together so everyone has an idea of what each other's playing, so they can play off of that and make things interesting, and you don't end up with 2 characters that just completely clash and don't work together and are just stalling the story, or you don't end up with a whole coterie of people with like the same abilities or same shtick, and no one really has a chance to have the spotlight or do their own thing or feel important. And again, secrets are fun. Backstabbing is great. I love player-on-player tension, or character-on-character tension, I should say. And in this game, even if, no matter what sort of game you're playing, backstories in Vampire is a must. So take the time to really have your players flesh out an interesting character and make sure they understand their motivations. If they just drop a character in your setting, they don't really know what to do and just waiting for stuff to happen, that's not going to be nearly as interesting as them having an idea of what they want to accomplish, even if it's something small, and that gives you, as a storyteller, hooks and things to work with. The book covers this too, which is cool. They have a relationship map, so you put everyone's names down and you make the little thread saying how they're connected, how they feel about each other, and whatnot. The whole meeting in a tavern thing doesn't work out as well in this. Also, don't breeze through touchstones and convictions. Really figure out the humanity side of things, because that will play into consequences. And again, consequences are fun and they're necessary, and they really are what drive this game. So make sure they're clearly defined and something that is likely to come up often in the story, not just some throwaway touchstone that's never going to be relevant. And you as a storyteller should make sure to challenge those convictions, give them some interesting choices they have to make. Backgrounds and advantages are pretty important too. So they can make whatever skills they want, but if everyone has like very similar backgrounds, that could be problematic. If everyone decides they want a Mala and you have a whole coterie, then you also have to play each member of the coterie's like sire constantly. That could be annoying. What's cool is they could buy backgrounds together, so the group could spend points to get a Mala who's the Mala for the group, or they could get a Haven for the group, so they're not all going to their own individual places constantly. And again, it's about giving everyone an opportunity to sort of do their thing, be interesting, have the spotlight. So if everyone's background's the same, someone's to be, I'm like the rich person with this and that, and then everyone else also takes a ton of resources, and we're all rich people. That could be fun if you're playing like a high society thing, but if someone wants that to be their thing, if you're making it together, you can avoid that. And you want characters that can work together as a coterie. In-character tension is very fun. This game deals with a ton of morally ambiguous things. You'll have plenty of opportunities. There'll be a lot of natural character-on-character tension. But if two characters are built just to be polar opposites, that's something you should deal with in session 0. And you as a storyteller, building characters, or NPCs. Again, it's about figuring out their motivations, making them interesting and memorable. This is very much a social game. A lot of role-playing is what it's designed to do. So make sure you're comfortable with that and less combat simulator. But combat can be really cool and rewarding in this, and it definitely has a place. So it's your job as a storyteller to make a setting, to keep the mood, and to fill it with interesting characters. And then to either come up with or encourage or play along with whatever goal or motivation that the coterie is trying to accomplish together. So yeah, do your session 0, figure out the premise of your game, figure out the setting of your game, and then make some cool characters together. That's it. You're done. You're ready. Well, there's a ton of work you have to do after that as far as building an interesting story and all of that, but getting started, that's the easy part, really. And then, yeah, just role play your heart out. I mean, that's it. You do it. Play vampire. Get weird, get dark, get gritty, get dramatic. And have fun. But not too much fun. But like, have a good time. So yeah, I'll be getting into the specifics of certain things like just city building or just character creation or just figuring out like politics later. Right now we're just covering the basics, and I'll help you along the way with the more complicated stuff down the line. Okay, that's it from me. I am Bully. This channel is TableGoth, and you are hopefully ready to play a game of Vampire. Bye forever.